Welcome to the Daily Globe. Please subscribe and hit the bell icon for more breaking updates. Today, the Supreme Court delivered a unanimous 9-0 decision that has upended the landscape of firearm ownership in America. The ruling, addressing the government's power to confiscate firearms, has sparked intense debate and emotion nationwide. This isn't just a legal milestone, it's a turning point for American identity, balancing liberty and safety. With justices from all sides in agreement, the decision demands a new, more thoughtful conversation about gun rights and public safety. As the nation reacts, one thing is clear: the relationship between Americans and their firearms has entered a bold, uncertain new era. The roots of the gun confiscation debate stretch back to the very founding of the United States, when the Second Amendment was written into the Bill of Rights. Its language, the right of the people to keep and bear arms, shall not be infringed, has sparked centuries of debate and legal interpretation, shaping the nation's relationship with firearms and personal liberty. For much of American history, gun laws were primarily concerned with the collective defense, focusing on the role of state militias rather than the rights of individual citizens. Early lawmakers saw firearms as essential tools for national security, and regulations reflected the need for a well-regulated militia, not personal ownership. But as the 20th century unfolded, America faced new challenges. The rise of organized crime during Prohibition, and later the violence of the gangster era, led to the first major federal gun control laws. The National Firearms Act of 1934 and the Gun Control Act of 1968 were direct responses to public fears about crime and the proliferation of dangerous weapons. Landmark Supreme Court cases would eventually redefine the conversation. In 2008, District of Columbia versus Heller marked a turning point, as the court ruled for the first time that the Second Amendment protects an individual's right to possess firearms, independent of service in a militia. Just 2 years later, McDonald versus Chicago extended that protection nationwide, applying it to state and local governments. These decisions ignited a new era of legal and political battles over the scope and limits of gun rights in America. The debate shifted dramatically. No longer was the question simply about ownership, but about how far government could go in regulating firearms. Town halls, courtrooms, and newsrooms became battlegrounds for passionate arguments on the side der sides. In this climate, red flag laws, also known as extreme risk protection orders, emerged as a controversial tool. These laws allow authorities to temporarily remove firearms from individuals deemed a threat to themselves or others, often based on petitions from family or law enforcement. Supporters argue that these measures save lives by preventing tragedies before they occur, pointing to cases where intervention may have averted mass shootings or suicides. They see red flag laws as a necessary balance between public safety and individual rights. Critics, however, warn that such laws can be abused, undermining due process by allowing property to be seized without a full hearing or adequate legal protections. They argue that constitutional rights must not be sacrificed, even in the name of safety. For years, this legal tension simmered: how to protect the public from harm while upholding the fundamental rights enshrined in the Constitution. Lawmakers, judges, and citizens alike wrestled with where to draw the line. Now that tension has reached the highest court in the land. The Supreme Court is poised to decide, once again, how America balances liberty and security, a decision that will echo for generations. The case, United States versus Miller, began with a deeply personal tragedy in Colorado, a state already familiar with the national debate over gun rights and public safety. What started as a family's private struggle soon became the center of a legal and political firestorm that would capture the attention of the entire country. John Miller, a decorated military veteran with no prior criminal record, found himself at the heart of this controversy. After his son reported what he believed to be troubling behavior, authorities invoked Colorado's Extreme Risk Protection Order, or ERPO law. Miller's firearms were seized by police, not because of a crime, but out of concern for potential future harm. The move was swift, and, for Miller, it felt like a sudden loss of his rights and identity. Miller's legal team quickly challenged the order, arguing that the process violated his constitutional rights. They claimed he was stripped of his firearms, without a fair hearing, or the chance to defend himself in court beforehand. The case raised urgent questions about due process, the presumption of innocence, and the limits of state power in the name of public safety. Colorado officials, however, stood firmly behind the ERPO law. They argued it was a crucial, life-saving tool designed to prevent tragedies before they occur. The law, they said, was temporary and included safeguards, such as the promise of a later hearing where gun owners could contest the order. For supporters, it was a necessary balance between individual rights and community safety. The 10th Circuit Court of Appeals ultimately upheld Colorado's law, but the legal battle was far from over. Across the country, other states faced similar challenges, and federal courts issued conflicting rulings on the constitutionality of red flag laws. This growing circuit split meant the issue was ripe for Supreme Court review. Recognizing the national significance and the potential to reshape the legal landscape, the Supreme Court agreed to hear the case. The justices would now decide not only the fate of Colorado's law, but also set a precedent that could affect gun rights and due process protections across America. At stake was the future of red flag laws nationwide, and the constitutional standards for when and how firearms can be confiscated. The decision would have far-reaching consequences for lawmakers, law enforcement, and millions of gun owners. As the case reached the highest court in the land, the nation watched with anticipation, knowing that the outcome could redefine the balance between individual liberty and collective security for generations to come. The Supreme Court's unanimous decision in United States v. Miller was both clear and transformative, marking a pivotal moment in the ongoing debate over gun rights and public safety in America. The ruling, delivered with a rare 9-0 consensus, sent a strong message about the importance of constitutional protections, even in the face of pressing social concerns. The court's opinion was nuanced, carefully balancing the government's interest in preventing harm with the individual's right to due process and the Second Amendment. Rather than striking down red flag laws entirely, the justices set forth a strict constitutional standard, one that demands robust procedural safeguards before the government can take away someone's firearms. The court emphasized that robust due process must come before confiscating firearms, ensuring that individuals are not deprived of their rights without a fair and meaningful opportunity to be heard. The only exception is in narrowly defined emergencies, where immediate action is necessary to prevent imminent harm. Even then, the court was clear: any temporary confiscation must be followed by a prompt adversarial hearing. At this hearing, the gun owner must be allowed to be present, to have legal counsel, and to challenge the evidence presented against them. This adversarial process is now a constitutional requirement. The court specifically rejected the use of ex parte hearings, where only one side is heard, as a sufficient basis for confiscation in most cases. These one-sided proceedings, the justices said, do not provide the necessary protections for fundamental rights. While the court did allow for a narrow emergency exception, it required that a full hearing be held within 24 to 48 hours, ensuring that any deprivation of rights is as brief and justified as possible. This ruling effectively invalidates the framework of Colorado's red flag law, as well as similar statutes in 21 other states, all of which must now be re-evaluated and rewritten to comply with the new constitutional standards. State legislatures across the country are now faced with the challenge of redesigning their laws to meet these higher standards, balancing the need for public safety with the imperative to protect individual rights. The decision sets a powerful new precedent, reshaping the legal landscape at the intersection of gun rights and due process, and signaling that constitutional protections cannot be set aside, even in the name of safety. As states respond to this landmark ruling, the nation will be watching closely to see how lawmakers, courts, and communities adapt to this new era of constitutional scrutiny. The Supreme Court's decision has shaken the political landscape, forcing immediate action in 22 states with now unconstitutional red flag laws. Democrats and gun control advocates see a setback, as the new requirements make these laws harder to implement. Activists worry the adversarial hearing requirement will slow intervention and reduce effectiveness. Republicans and gun rights groups celebrate a major victory for due process, vowing to resist new ERPO laws. The ruling will be a central issue in upcoming elections, with candidates forced to take clear positions. The debate has shifted from whether red flag laws should exist to how they must be structured. The gun debate remains front and center in American politics. The ruling brings significant economic consequences, especially for the 22 states that must overhaul their laws and retrain officials. Non-compliance could trigger costly civil rights lawsuits. The firearms industry has seen a short-term boost but faces uncertainty as states respond differently. For gun owners, stronger property rights are balanced by the potential cost of legal defense in adversarial hearings. The decision may create new economic barriers tying Second Amendment rights to the ability to afford legal counsel. broader economic impacts on public safety, tourism, and healthcare remain uncertain. The true cost will depend on how effectively states adapt their laws. The ruling's impact is deeply personal, dividing communities. For some, it's a relief, protecting due process and preventing unjust confiscation. For others, it's a source of fear, narrowing the window to prevent tragedies. Teachers, parents, and community leaders worry about slower interventions. The decision shifts responsibility to families and communities, emphasizing mental health support and early intervention. Whether communities can build these support systems remains to be seen. The ruling could deepen divisions or spark more honest conversations about rights and safety. Its true impact will depend on how Americans respond. Legal experts are divided on the Miller decision's long-term effects. Conservatives praise its defense of due process, arguing it restores the presumption of innocence to gun rights. They say the ruling doesn't prevent disarming dangerous people, but ensures fairness. Public health and gun violence prevention experts warn the new standard could undermine the effectiveness of red flag laws. They argue that requiring hearings before confiscation may delay urgent interventions. Legal historians see the unanimous vote as a search for middle ground, not an end to the debate. The court has handed the challenge back to the states, providing a constitutional blueprint. The future will depend on how legislatures respond. The Supreme Court's unanimous decision hasn't ended the gun debate, but it's redrawn the battlefield. The ruling affirms due process as a guardian of gun rights, closing the door on swift confiscation by accusation alone. Now the challenge is for lawmakers to craft fair, effective laws that protect both rights and safety. Citizens are called to engage thoughtfully, demanding solutions that meet the new constitutional standard. The Second Amendment story continues to evolve, shaped by how communities respond. The legacy of the Miller decision will be measured by its real-world impact on lives and liberty. The work of shaping that legacy begins now, in every community across the nation.